What if everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's biggest stars was a lie? What if behind the glittering lights and million-dollar smiles there was a world of darkness, hidden rituals, manipulation, and unspeakable horrors? Tonight, we're about to pull back the curtain on one of the most shocking revelations the entertainment industry has ever seen. And it all started with Jim Carrey. It was 9:30 a.m., June 2nd, 2025. The tension in Los Angeles Superior Court was palpable, almost suffocating. Eyes were fixed on a single man sitting in the front row, Jim Carrey. Not the funny, energetic comedian the world knew and loved, but a transformed version of him. His once vibrant blue eyes now held a haunting emptiness, his face gaunt, and his hair streaked with gray. The man who had made millions laugh was about to do something no one expected. He was about to reveal Hollywood's ugliest secrets. Carrey's presence in that courtroom wasn't just symbolic, it was a declaration that the truth was about to break wide open. And the man at the center of it all? Sean "Diddy" Combs, one of the most powerful figures in the entertainment industry, was about to have his empire shaken to its core.
The unexpected witness. The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor, Sarah Jenkins, stepped forward, her voice steady but laced with an undeniable intensity. "Your Honor," she began, "today we present evidence that will pull back the curtain on one of the most dangerous and manipulative figures in Hollywood, Sean "Diddy" Combs." Her words hung in the air, charged with the weight of what was to come. The tension only grew as the large screen in the courtroom flickered to life, but it wasn't just any footage. It was a glimpse into the darkest corners of Diddy's world, a world that Jim Carrey knew all too well. The world had always viewed Diddy as a music mogul, a man whose charisma could bend the industry to his will. But today, his polished image was being torn apart, and Jim Carrey was the one holding the scalpel. As the camera panned across the courtroom, all eyes shifted to Carrey. He sat there motionless, his face betraying no emotion. The transformation from the comedic genius to a man weighed down by years of torment was undeniable. This was no longer the man who had cracked jokes on screen or performed wild antics for laughs. This was a man with a secret so horrifying it was about to change the entire narrative of Diddy's life. Carrey's decision to sit there, to speak up now, was nothing short of shocking. The legendary comedian, once the symbol of joy and light, was about to reveal something that no one expected: his involvement in the very world that Diddy had built. The courtroom held its breath as the evidence, carefully hidden for years, was finally laid bare. And Carrey, despite the years of pain it caused him, was prepared to be the whistleblower. There was no turning back.
Diddy's outburst. The moment the screen lit up in the courtroom, the atmosphere shifted from tense to outright explosive. Sean "Diddy" Combs, sitting calmly just moments before, froze. His hand, still holding the glass, trembled slightly before he dropped it, sending shards of crystal scattering across the polished marble floor. The sound was almost deafening in the silence that followed. "Stop it! Stop it right now!" Diddy roared, his voice cracking with raw fury. He leaped from his seat, his eyes wide with panic, as though the very footage itself was a personal assault. His usual composure had completely vanished, replaced with a desperation that no one in the courtroom had seen before. His face, once smooth and confident, was now flushed with rage. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Diddy's frantic outburst and Jim Carrey, who remained eerily still in his seat. Carrey's eyes were closed, his face expressionless, but a single tear slowly traced down his cheek. He wasn't surprised. He knew exactly what the tape contained. In a sense, he had predicted this moment. The outrage, the denial, the fury that would come from Diddy as soon as the truth began to surface. This was the moment that Carrey had feared for so long, and yet
He knew it was inevitable. Diddy's empire, built on manipulation and hidden darkness, was about to collapse, and Carrey would be the one to make sure it did. The judge, Evelyn Thorne, slammed her gavel. "Order, order in the court," she barked, but the sound of Diddy's shouts only grew louder. The courtroom was on the brink of chaos. Diddy, still enraged, screamed out against the evidence, his words a garbled mess of fury. "This is a joke, a setup, all lies," he shouted, his voice barely controlled, cracking under the weight of the truth he could no longer deny. As the situation escalated, security moved in, taking hold of Diddy and restraining him. His body shook with rage, but his efforts to break free became weaker, more resigned. The struggle, once so intense, began to fade into a desperate surrender. Judge Thorne, her face etched with disappointment, declared, "Given this uncontrolled outburst, I am calling a recess for 30 minutes. Everyone is to exit the courtroom in an orderly fashion." The murmur of whispers swept through the room like a wave, and people scrambled to leave, but Jim Carrey remained seated. His eyes stayed locked on the black screen, the site of his greatest fear. 30 minutes. He had 30 minutes to prepare himself for what was coming next, and it would be the most important moment of his life. Was he ready? He had no choice.
Jim's terrifying confession. The recess lasted what felt like an eternity. But when the court reconvened, the air was still thick with tension. The door creaked open, and Jim Carrey slowly walked to the witness stand. His movements were deliberate, measured, nothing like the fast-talking comedian people once adored. The room watched in silence as he took his seat. Gone was the carefree laughter, replaced by a somber man carrying the weight of unspeakable memories. When the prosecutor, Sarah Jenkins, spoke his name, it echoed through the courtroom like a judgment. "Mr. Carrey, please tell us about your relationship with the defendant, Sean Combs." Carrey inhaled deeply, his voice cracking slightly as he began. "I knew Sean. I knew him back in the late 90s. Back then, I was on top of the world. Everything was fast, busy. My career was at its peak. But I felt lonely, like something was missing." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "He came to me then. He said he admired my work, that I was a visionary, that together we could break new boundaries. He spoke about a world that only people like us could reach. I believed him," Carrey said with a strained laugh, but there was no joy in it, just a hollow echo of the hope he had once felt. He had this strange kind of charisma, an assurance that made you feel like you could trust him, like you could be part of something bigger. The courtroom was still as Carrey's voice began to shake. He was reliving it, each word dragging him back into the dark world he had entered so many years ago. Carrey said he promised me more than fame. His eyes focused somewhere far off, as if seeing it all again. He promised me power, creativity, a place among the elites, but I didn't realize what I was really getting into. I didn't realize that I was stepping into something that would consume me. Carrey described the lavish parties, the endless connections, and the whirlwind of fame that Diddy had introduced him to. Celebrities, athletes, and powerful industry moguls all seemed to orbit around Diddy's world. Names like Britney Spears, Justin Timberlake, and Brad Pitt appeared like mirages in a haze of luxury and excess. But Carrey, despite the glittering world, always felt there was something more, something hidden beneath it all. "And that's when it started," Carrey said, his voice lowering. It was subtle at first, just little things, small requests at parties, things that felt off. But nothing too overt. It was like an invisible web, a series of small, quiet threads pulling you deeper and deeper without you even realizing it. The room was frozen as every word out of Carrey's mouth felt like a slow unraveling of everything Diddy had built. His empire of power, influence, and manipulation. Jim Carrey was no longer just the man who made the world laugh. He was a man trapped by his own choices, pulled into a world that turned out to be much darker than he ever imagined.
The ritual, a hidden world. The courtroom remained eerily still as Jim Carrey's testimony took an even darker turn. He closed his eyes briefly, as though bracing himself to relive one of the most horrifying moments of his life. His voice was quieter now, but it carried the weight of years spent hiding the truth. It was around mid-2003, Carrey began, his voice almost a whisper. I remember it like it was yesterday, a hot evening in Miami. Sean invited me to his villa. I thought it was another party, another night of excess and indulgence, but I had no idea what he had in store for me. The room seemed to hold its breath as Carrey's words slowly filled the air, each one carrying a sense of dread that no one could have prepared for. When I arrived, he led me to a large room. It looked like a private spa. There, in the center of the room, was a massive bathtub made of white marble, and it was filled to the brim, completely filled with tomato sauce, dark, thick, congealed tomato sauce. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. The details were so bizarre, so unimaginable, that many had to pause to process what they were hearing. Carrey's face twisted in pain as he continued. I stood there, confused. I asked him, "What is this, Sean?" He paused, swallowing hard, the memory clearly still fresh in his mind, and he just smiled. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. His assistants were standing there, silent, emotionless. One of them was holding an old video camera. The other had a white towel. Sean told me, "This is purification, Jim. This is how the great are born. You have to leave your old self behind. Wash away everything that's holding you back." Carrey's voice faltered, as though he was fighting back the flood of emotions that came with remembering those chilling words. I was terrified, but I didn't know what to do. He looked at me and said, "You want to be a legend, right? This is the first step." A shudder ran through Carrey's body as he wiped a tear from his cheek, his voice barely audible. I didn't want to. I didn't know what was happening, but I was scared. Scared that if I didn't do this, my career would be over. Scared that if I refused, I'd never belong in this world that he controlled. So I did it. I stepped into that bathtub. I submerged myself in the cold, thick tomato sauce. It felt wrong, dirty, disgusting. The room was completely silent now, as the depth of Carrey's testimony settled over the courtroom like a thick fog. He paused again, looking down at his hands, as if trying to shake off the lingering memory of that night. It was supposed to be purification, but it was the opposite. It was a humiliation, a stripping away of who I was, and I stayed in there for about 10 minutes. When I got out, he handed me the towel. I showered, but the feeling never left me. A long silence followed. The weight of Carrey's words had stunned everyone in the room into silence. What could possibly drive a man to do something like that? And how many others had been caught in the same web of manipulation? It wasn't about rebirth or art. It was about control. And once you let them in, once you submit, there's no escape. I didn't do it out of desire. I did it because I was scared. Scared that if I didn't, I'd lose everything.
The clap tape revelation. The courtroom was still in shock, but Jim Carrey wasn't finished. His testimony had already shattered the illusion of Diddy's flawless empire, but there was more to come, more that would drive the final nail into the coffin of Diddy's carefully curated persona. Prosecutor Sarah Jenkins gently placed a small box on the witness stand. "Mr. Carey, are you aware of a tape known as the clap tape?" she asked, her voice steady but with an unmistakable weight. The entire room shifted uneasily, anticipation thick in the air. Carey's eyes flickered briefly to the box, but he didn't need to see it to know exactly what it contained. "Yes," he said softly, his voice breaking slightly. "I saw it once. It was a few years ago, and it's something I'll never forget." The room leaned in. Carey's tone was hushed, as though the memory itself was too painful to articulate fully. It wasn't just any tape. It was something that showed the true nature of the world Diddy had created. It was a record of moments, private moments, twisted moments, where people were humiliated, forced to do things they didn't want to do. And the worst part? Everyone involved was a victim. He paused, as if searching for the words. "I saw Usher in it. He was just a kid back then, living in Diddy's house, and I remember looking at him in the tape. He looked terrified. He wasn't the Usher everyone knew, the confident, smooth performer. He was a broken young man, caught in a world he didn't choose." Carey's voice grew softer, his eyes distant as he recounted more. "And then there was Lindsay Lohan. She was young, popular. She seemed like she had everything. But in that tape, she was falling apart. She seemed to be losing herself, losing control. I saw her in a state I can't even describe. I knew then that this wasn't just about control over fame. It was about destroying people from the inside out."
The courtroom was hushed, every person hanging on Carey's every word, stunned by the names being dropped, the faces of famous victims now forever linked to this hidden nightmare. The presence of these well-known figures in such a tape painted an even more sinister picture, one that would forever taint the glitzy facade of Hollywood. Carey wiped his eyes again, the weight of it all becoming too much. This wasn't just some isolated incident. It was part of a system, Diddy's system, a system built on manipulation, fear, and the complete destruction of anyone who got too close. That tape, it was proof. Proof that Diddy was using his power to break people down, to strip them of their dignity, to make them part of his world in a way that they couldn't escape. The room was silent, a strange mixture of disbelief and horror hanging in the air. This wasn't a simple Hollywood scandal. This was something much darker. An intricate web of psychological abuse, twisted rituals, and a powerful man who had used his influence to control those around him. And now, Jim Carrey had brought it all to light. Prosecutor Jenkins, with a grim but satisfied expression, turned toward the jury. "Your Honor, we believe the clap tape is vital evidence in this case. It shows a pattern of behavior that goes beyond just one incident. It reveals a calculated strategy of psychological manipulation by the defendant." Carey, his eyes locked on the distant horizon, nodded faintly. It wasn't just a tape. It was the key to everything, a record of how he worked, how he destroyed people, how he controlled them. And I was one of the many victims who got caught in it.
A system of abuse. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Jim Carrey had just revealed the harrowing truth of the clap tape, but the fallout was far from over. The gravity of his words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The audience had already heard the names, the faces, but the darkest part of Carey's testimony was yet to come, the true scale of what Diddy had created. Carey's eyes slowly swept across the room, his voice softening as he spoke again. "What I saw in that tape was just a glimpse of something much bigger. Diddy didn't just manipulate one or two people. This was a system, a network of control, a mechanism built to break people down, to strip them of their power, their dignity, everything. It wasn't an isolated moment, it was a pattern, and it happened over and over again. The crowd, already on edge, was now hanging on every word. Carrey wasn't just speaking about one event, one victim, he was speaking about an entire culture of abuse hidden behind the glitz and glamour of Hollywood's elite. "I saw it all the time," Carrey continued, his voice growing stronger despite the tremor that still betrayed his emotions. "I saw things I can never forget. Young women, some of them just starting their careers, leaving rooms in tears, their clothes disheveled, their eyes hollow. It wasn't just the women, though. I saw men, famous, powerful men, dazed, drunk, and barely able to keep their heads up. But the worst part, they were all laughing, taking pictures, joking, while others struggled. They were complicit." A chill ran through the room as Carrey's words painted a horrific picture. One where those who might have had the power to speak out were too trapped in Diddy's world to do so, and those who didn't conform, they were silenced, discarded, used, and abused. Leonardo DiCaprio told me once, in 2005, that he'd witnessed some of the same things at Diddy's parties. He said he saw people do things they'd regret. But Leo, like so many others, was too afraid to speak out, too afraid of what Diddy could do, what it would cost him. And I get it. I get why they stayed silent, because Diddy's power wasn't just in his fame, it was in the fear he could instill, the control he had over everyone around him.
A somber silence fell over the courtroom. The details were horrifying. Stripped of the usual Hollywood sheen, this was a reality of cruelty, fear, and unchallenged power. "That's the system Diddy built," Carrey continued, shaking his head slowly. "It wasn't about being a mogul. It was about owning people, making them believe they needed him, making them think that without him they would disappear from the spotlight. He controlled their careers, their minds, their very souls. And for so many of us, it was a choice between survival and suffering. You either played by his rules or you vanished." The courtroom had become a stage for the most unimaginable revelations. For every name Carrey dropped, for every story he told, the truth became clearer. This was a machine, a network of power that extended far beyond just one man. Diddy had been the architect, but countless others had been trapped in his web, struggling to escape, or worse, too afraid to try. "And that's what I realized," Carrey said, his voice now steady, though the pain was evident. "This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about a few people. This was a system, one that needed to be exposed. If I didn't speak out, how many more would suffer in silence? How many people had been manipulated, humiliated, or destroyed by the very same man? The answer is too many." The courtroom seemed to breathe as one, the air heavy with the weight of the truth that had been laid bare. Jim Carrey wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for everyone who had been silenced, for every victim who had been too afraid to step forward, for every person who had been caught in Diddy's grip.
Public outrage and social media impact. As Jim Carrey's testimony continued, the courtroom was still reeling from the bombshells he had dropped. But outside those walls, the true impact was just beginning to unfold. Within hours of his chilling revelations, the media and social media exploded into a frenzy. The name Diddy was trending everywhere. News outlets scrambled to report on the trial, and the stories that had once been whispered in dark corners of Hollywood were now being shouted from the rooftops. The press had always treated Diddy like a king, a visionary mogul who controlled the music industry and beyond. But now, In the wake of Carrey's testimony, that image was shattered. Celebrities who had once been loyal to Diddy began to distance themselves. One by one, former associates, some who had been too afraid to speak before, were now opening up, sharing their own stories of manipulation and abuse. A new narrative was taking hold. What had once been a world of glitzy parties and excess now appeared grotesque, twisted, and exploitative. Social media erupted in outrage as people from all walks of life voiced their disgust. Hashtags like Expose Diddy and Justice for the Victims quickly gained traction as millions of voices demanded answers. People who had never been involved in the industry were now suddenly aware of the darkness lurking behind the glittering facade of Hollywood. A Reuters poll conducted just hours after Carrey's testimony showed that over 70% of respondents believed Diddy was guilty based on the evidence that had already been presented. The public's trust in the music mogul had plummeted, and the tide of opinion had shifted irreversibly. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was an accusation of a powerful man using his position to manipulate and destroy the lives of those around him. In a moment of brutal honesty, Carrey had made it clear that the abuse wasn't just a few bad incidents, it was a system, an entire industry of fear and control. And the public was finally beginning to realize that the glitter and glamour they had once admired were built on a foundation of power and pain.
The press quickly picked up the stories of others who had been in the same orbit as Diddy. People began to speak up. Writers, musicians, and even actors who had long been silent were now coming forward with their own disturbing accounts of life under Diddy's influence. Each story added fuel to the fire, and the public's outrage grew louder with each passing hour. Meanwhile, Diddy's legal team, desperate to salvage their client's crumbling empire, issued a statement just hours after Carrey's testimony. These accusations are outright fabrications, they declared. What is being presented in court is a clear attempt to defame a man who has contributed to the cultural landscape for decades. But the damage was already done. The public wasn't listening anymore. The defense couldn't erase the reality of what was unfolding in the courtroom. It wasn't just the social media outrage that was growing. Advertisers began to drop Diddy's brand, with major companies pulling their endorsements. Television networks canceled scheduled appearances, and film studios suddenly stopped returning his calls. The face of the entertainment industry that had once been everywhere now found himself on the outside looking in. His empire, which had once seemed untouchable, was beginning to crumble beneath the weight of these revelations. This wasn't just a criminal case anymore. It had become a public reckoning, one that would forever change the entertainment industry. Hollywood had long been a place of dreams, but Jim Carrey's testimony had turned those dreams into a nightmare for Diddy. And as the public grew angrier and more determined for justice, the once untouchable mogul found himself trapped in a world of his own making.
The reckoning. As the trial continued, every new piece of evidence, every shocking testimony made it clearer than ever. Jim Carrey's brave stand had become a turning point, not just for himself, but for the entire entertainment industry. What had started as a courtroom drama, a case about one man's quest for justice, had evolved into something much larger. It was now about exposing the toxic, abusive power structures that had long controlled Hollywood from the shadows. Diddy, the music mogul once seen as an untouchable force, was now a symbol of everything wrong with an industry that valued power and influence over people. Despite his defense's best efforts, the overwhelming weight of the testimony, the tapes, and the growing list of accusers continued to push the case forward. His reputation, carefully constructed over decades, had crumbled beyond repair. For Jim Carrey, the journey wasn't easy. The pain, the memories, and the fear of what might happen after he spoke out had nearly destroyed him. His confession wasn't just a moment of catharsis. It was the culmination of years spent living with the trauma, the weight of secrets he could no longer bear.
And in that courtroom, he didn't just take a stand for himself, but for all those who had been too afraid to speak up. The public's reaction was swift and unrelenting. What had once been dismissed as rumors or whispers was now undeniable, etched in the annals of history. As more people came forward, sharing their own stories of abuse, the tidal wave of support for the victims grew stronger. Social media, once a tool of idolization, had become a platform for truth. The world had finally woken up. And as the trial dragged on, Diddy's fall from grace became increasingly irreversible. The endorsement deals, once the lifeblood of his empire, were now pulled one by one. Major brands, once proud to be associated with him, publicly distanced themselves. Even his closest allies were stepping away, no longer able to ignore the truth. But through it all, one thing remained clear. The darkness that had been hidden behind the glittering world of Hollywood was no longer concealed. Jim Carrey had pulled the curtain, and in doing so, had started a much-needed reckoning. The world was now looking at the entertainment industry through a different lens. No longer was it just a place for glamour and stardom. It was a place where power had been abused, where the vulnerable had been exploited, and where the truth had been buried. And as the final arguments were made and the jury deliberated, it was clear that Hollywood would never be the same. The walls that once protected the powerful were beginning to crack. The industry, long resistant to change, was facing an undeniable shift. And for the first time in a long time, justice felt like a possibility. Jim Carrey may have started this journey as a man seeking redemption for himself, but by the end, he had sparked a movement that would change the way the entertainment industry operated forever. The people, the stories, and the truth that had been silenced for so long could no longer be ignored. And as the final gavel fell, the world knew this was just the beginning. Hollywood's dark secrets, once buried deep in the shadows, had finally come to the light. And for those who had been brave enough to speak, there would be no turning back.